We're in the concluding sermon of this sermon series that we've been in for the past several weeks on uncovering the sacred. Most people celebrate Epiphany as just one day. We like to celebrate Epiphany as like several weeks. And so we've been uncovering the sacred. We've been gleaning from mostly the Gospel of Luke and other narratives. And also we've been leaning upon Rob Bell's Everything is Spiritual book. And we've been uncovering the sacred of our day-to-day lives. We've been challenging ourselves to see our ordinary and mundane tasks as truly spiritual and sacred. We've been really challenged this season to lean into what it means to truly view our enemies or the others as sacred. And even more challenging, but looking in the mirror and recognizing ourselves as sacred. And as we come into this concluding sermon, I think this is the most important message, the most important text. If you get nothing else from this entire Epiphany sermon series, take this message with you. Because today is about the sacred one. Today is about the sacred one that calls us sacred. The sacred one that empowers and equips us to be sacred beings of light in the world. Sacred one. This text reminds us why. Why we do what we do. Why we as people of faith embody such a light, such grace, such love for the world. This is the foundation. This text is amazing. When you read it and you realize what's taking place in this text, how magnificent of an encounter is happening on the top of that mountain, you're reminded of the empowerment that you have because of the transfiguration, because of the transformation that Christ calls us to day in and day out. Luke chapter 9 is such a fascinating chapter. I encourage you sometime throughout this week, go to the entire chapter of Luke chapter 9. Because it starts out with Jesus sending the disciples into the towns, into the communities. And he's telling them, go door to door. Go to each and every home. Bless people. Serve people, heal people, and you'll be able to do it because you're doing it in my name. Go and do these things. And simultaneously at this time, King Herod gets word of what's going on in the communities. And there's all these rumors of John the Baptist coming back, resurrecting, doing all these miracles in the towns. And I can imagine King Herod was like, well, I took care of John the Baptist. I'm pretty sure that's not him. Then some are like, it's Elijah, it's a prophet, something's going on. And there's this buzz happening about who is Jesus? And to give us even more context, you and I we've been celebrating Jesus since Christmas. We've been talking about Jesus, the birth, all of these magnificent things about Jesus' life. But Jesus' ministry was very short. So when we come into this passage in Luke, we're recognizing that Jesus' ministry is taking traction. That these people of faith are joining in this movement or questioning and resisting what's going on. And so then immediately after that is the largest miracle within the Gospel of Luke, which is Jesus feeding the 5,000, 2 fish and 5 loaves. Whoa, what a miracle. Followed up by Jesus approaching the disciples. And while the rest of the world is like, who's this guy? What does he do? How did he just feed this? What's going on? And all these rumors of prophets and resurrections are happening. And Jesus goes to his disciples and he says, well, who do you say? Who do you guys think that I am? Peter says, you're God's Messiah. And then immediately after that, Jesus predicts his death. And they're like, well, what is happening? You're telling us to go and bless and heal. You're performing miracles. You're God's Messiah, but you're going to die? Like really soon? But then he talks of the resurrection in a way of those who want to save their lives are going to lose their lives. All this upside down kingdom liturgy starts to form and to happen. All this servant leadership is being poured out of Jesus to the disciples. And then the transfiguration. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, goes up a mountain. It's a typical thing to do when you're trying to get a message from God. We've read it throughout the entire Old Testament of moments of Moses going to the top of Mount Sinai and getting the 10 Commandments from God, having a glow on his face to the point that he went and hid in the tabernacle because he's like, oh my gosh, been witnessed in a message from God directly. Elijah gets a word from God directly on the mountain, telling him to go anoint the leaders of the time, to bless the leaders in the area. And so this is not uncommon for Jesus to just say, hey, you three, come on up with me. Let's go pray. Let's go pray on the top of this mountain. And then when they do, this moment, can you imagine like a lightning bolt, like this dazzling glow? All of a sudden, there's Jesus, but Jesus isn't alone. There's Moses and Elijah. These towering figures of Israel's past. Moses representing the fulfillment of the law, and Elijah representing the fulfillment of the prophets. And I love that passage. The verse specifically when it says, disciples were kind of sleepy. Like, can you imagine, like all of this is taking place, and the disciples are like, oh, I'm kind of tired right now. But then it says they were awakened. It says when they woke up, they witnessed the glory of God right before them. And our English word, clarity, is actually derived from this word, glory. So we can recognize that all of a sudden it became clear. All these rumors, all this confusion, all this wonder of what's happening with our world, with our nation, what's happening in our communities, in our lives, what's going on. There was clarity. There was clarity right in front of them. It was Jesus. This was the revelation that Jesus is the Christ, that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the incarnation. Jesus is who he says that he is. And so the disciples were awakened, this spiritual awakening to what was taking place. You and I are very sleepy people. Physically, yes, we're exhausted. Oh my goodness, are we exhausted? Keeping up with the demands of the day-to-day, everything that we have to do from our chores and our tasks list. We're tired people. Emotionally, mentally, physically, we're tired. And this passage is highlighting the spiritual exhaustion we feel. How do we realign ourselves with Christ? How do we realign ourselves in a way that we are spiritually awakened, even despite all of our physical exhaustions? Awakening to the reality of the sacred one that calls us sacred. And as they awaken, all of a sudden Peter is overwhelmed. And it says, let me make some dwelling places. I got to make tents for Elijah and Moses and Jesus. Let me set up shelter. And this is the time when Moses and Elijah are actually exiting the scene. And Peter says, no, let me make some space. Peter was trying to conserve that moment. Peter was trying to memorialize that moment. He was trying to capture it. More people need to experience this transfiguration, this transformation that's taking place. You and I do that all the time. Peter wasn't necessarily in the wrong, but he missed it. He missed the moment by trying to memorialize the moment. You and I miss it. We try and capture and conserve and memorialize things that happen in our lives rather than allowing our spirituality to thrive in the experience. So much so that the experience permeates our soul. And we don't know what else to do but to share it, to be this dazzling light, to be the light of Christ's love in the world around us. But instead we try to memorialize those moments rather than fully experiencing and awakening to what is happening. And then the passage concludes. All of this extravagant, magnificent event is taking place of Jesus revealing Jesus' self, the fulfillment of the law and the prophecies. And the passage concludes by this moment of a cloud covering the mountain. And a voice from the cloud says, "This is my son. This is the chosen one." If I was going to change it to match this sermon today, I'd say, "This is the sacred one." And you might be listening to that very verse and you're like, "That sounds familiar." That's because you were here at the beginning of the Epiphany sermon series. Because the first sermon that we preached in this series was Jesus' baptism. John the Baptist is baptizing Jesus into the Jordan River, and when Jesus comes out, there's a voice from heaven that says, "This is my son. This is the chosen one. Listen to him." So as we end this sermon series, we're reminded back to the beginning of the sermon series of those sacred baptismal waters, those waters that unite you and I with one another and you and I to the sacred one. Our identity lies within those baptismal waters, that sign and seal. And yes, we memorialize that moment of our baptism. We remember it, we capture it in such magnificent ways, and it's a day in and day out experience. Our baptisms are a morning and morning and morning invitation. Every morning we are invited to live out those sacred baptismal waters, those callings of us to be Christ in the world, to be love. Love that this world doesn't understand, to extend mercy in areas that the world tells us not to extend forgiveness instead of punishment, to extend grace, justice, embrace in a radical, upside-down way that the world doesn't understand. But we understand it because we know the sacred one. We know the one that calls us into the baptismal waters, the one that calls us to our daily activities and is with us, equipping us and empowering us, reminding us that we are called sacred because of this transfiguration, because of this transformation that happens within us. It happens in the world around us when we choose to lean into that transformation. We try to memorialize. We try to capture moments. We try to experience those mountaintops so often. And one way that we do that is the first Sunday of every month. We come to church together. We gather. We lean into the sacred one by coming to this table. We come to this table as a reminder of God, of the sacred one, that despite what is happening in our world around us, that we come back to this table, that we are reminded who calls us to this table, that we feast on the bread, we feast on the cup as a reminder that you and I are sacred.